I'm Radhika Subramaniam, and I'm joining you from New York, where it's a blazing hot afternoon in Brooklyn. And I'm really happy to be in conversation today with colleagues who are actually joining us from several different places in the world. I think a couple from the UK, from Cyprus, and from Portugal. So it's wonderful that we can walk together to, I'm not sure where Blue Jeans server is housed, but whatever, we're e-walking to wherever their servers are in order to have this conversation together. And obviously some of you are still in Greece and others are joining us from elsewhere. I was particularly happy to be both introduced to everyone's work, but also to be moderating this panel in particular, because it's one of those that perhaps most fundamentally to my mind grows out of the premise or the overall theme under which this conference was gathered, which is walking as a question, which was intended and I hope has indeed provoked in many people what it means to ask a question through walking, and what it means and what kind of a question walking itself might provoke. That is, what are questions you can only walk to ask or unwalk to ask or not be able to walk to ask, and what are questions that arise because you walk. And so in titling and gathering the presentations today under this rubric of Unlearning to Walk, it was precisely because all of them in different ways try to get at the core of what happens phenomenologically, experientially in the process of walking, and in each of them in a very different ways, and I think we'll get into it a little bit. We are assuming by and large that people have actually looked at the work online, but I would like to give each of the panelists a chance to maybe in 3 or 4 minutes say a little bit about your work. You can either contextualize what you submitted and we've already looked at online, or you might want to make some more general comments about your practice at large. Just for the purposes of those who've gathered, we have Yannis Christidis here from Cyprus, whose project was done in collaboration with Kyprianidou. We have Simon Piasecki from the UK, Hanna Randall, also from the UK, and Filipe Antunes from Portugal, Lisbon, I believe. So perhaps, Yannis, we could start with you, and if you could, in just 3 or 4 minutes, give us some sense of your work and practice and what we were actually have looked at already.
Thank you, Radhika. Thank you, Gerd, for all the work you put up so far with the conference, and thank you all for giving me this short amount of time to explain a bit about my work, what you might have already seen. So actually, my interest, I studied cultural technology and communication, then I did my research on sound design, and I still research sound and the way we use sound to communicate with our environment and with our neighborhood, maybe if it is a spiritual neighborhood, a conceptual network, or an actual neighborhood. The whole thing that intrigues me possibly is the approach by Michael Bull that started maybe 10, maybe more, maybe 15 years ago, about the iPod culture and what it is to walk while listening to something. This iPod culture and the continuation of it started having music in the citizens' ears as a creation of a new soundscape in the soundscape of the city. The other theme that inspired, let's say, the artwork we did with Effie was the twofold way that can be evolved when someone walks. So it can be the absorption into the outside world of the surrounding landscapes, and the direction of the attention away from the self and towards the environment. So is it mind clearing, or is it focused thinking, or is it a combination of both? Is it the dynamics of walking changing constantly while someone walks, either in the city or in the nature, in a rural environment. So the inspiration has been also the poem by Charles Bukowski, with a beautiful poem with the dog following the writer, following on his way to the grocery store, and the dog walks 8 blocks with him, and then he vanishes, which is actually it's creating a dialogue between the thoughts and the non-thoughts as we see it in the artwork of the poet, and that's why the sound piece and the video art, if we can call it a video art piece, has this hue of being there focused and being forgetted, being I don't know, unconsciously wandering towards towards a place that can be no place. That's my brief introduction. Thank you.
Thank you. Simon, would you like to go next?
Yeah, with pleasure. And I should say, Radhika, thank you so much for pronouncing my name correctly. I was quite amazed, actually. Nobody ever announces, nobody ever gets my name right. So Piasecki, fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, so I've been making work, I suppose, about human movement more broadly for over 20 years. And that was back discovering family that had been lost really because of the death of my grandfather in the Second World War. I discovered them in Ukraine, and that he had walked from Poland across Europe, at that time to Beirut, and then had made his way via the Mediterranean across finally to Britain. And I never knew him. He died when he was 25. But just that journey, I think, started to inspire me a lot. And I began to wonder why. I began to kind of realize that when people flee, when they have to escape, it's often at night and over mountains. So in the early years of my interest, I started far too ambitiously to make theatre and performance taking audiences at night over hills and small mountains. And I did this in Wales on the Clwydian Range several times. And I also did it with some wonderful Basque friends near Bilbao in Spain. And these pieces were very much about identity and the construction of identity. And I think I was interested in the fact that when you find yourself high up, particularly on a hillside and at night, you view your identity very differently. It's almost like you're separated from your life. And so that distance brings a kind of interesting objectivity. So that was the early work, but after exploring that in all sorts of different ways for a number of years, I began to wonder why people would walk and suffer as a matter of choice, rather than to flee. Sorry, my dog again. Rather than to flee. So that meant that I knew this would happen. My dogs have started to bark. Go on, go away. Sorry. So I wondered why people would choose to suffer a long walk, a very long walk. And it made me think very much about mourning as well, because I realized that often when someone has lost someone, it seemed to me that a lot of people choose usually to raise money for a charity or some such, by doing something that's physically very, very difficult to do, like cycling 1,000 miles or walking across America, or all of these sort of things. And I came across more and more stories like this, and also met a lot of people along the way, and it made me kind of realize that I was becoming interested in the notion of pilgrimage. And there's a new interest in pilgrimage which is very secular. More and more people, for example, are choosing to walk the Camino de Santiago. So I'm very interested in this kind of notion of how we revitalize ourselves through suffering a very long walk, and what the relationship of that endurance, of the pain in the body really, is to perhaps something penitential, I don't know, or to perhaps some kind of sense of renewal. And the more I looked around the world, the more examples of this I found. So I've been writing articles on, for example, the Kailas Yatra in Tibet. I've been sort of looking at the Shikoku pilgrimage in Japan, and reading all sorts of wonderful sort of people. And it made me want to do some pilgrimage myself. So for this conference was the inspiration for me to do something I'd wanted to do for a long time, and could only do locally because of COVID. So I started with Chris Darby, who's here. We walked a bit of an old pilgrimage route in North Wales as a test walk. And then I spent 7 days with a priest. I'm not a Christian, so that was really interesting for me. I walked with a priest on an ancient Saxon pilgrimage route for 160 kilometers for 7 days, and that finished 2 weeks ago. And that's what my audio paper was recorded on. Thank you. I'm sorry about my dogs. I think you're muted.
Okay. I think that's part of the soundscape of our existence. Hanna, could we perhaps hear a bit from you?
Yes, thank you so much. And like Simon, I might have some noise interference, but from seagulls, they are raucous at this time of year, so I apologise in advance. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me tonight, and for this gigantic organisational feat that Geert has accomplished. It's incredible. I feel really blessed to be amongst everyone here. Yeah, so I'm a fiction writer and a PhD researcher at the University of Sussex, and I'm based in Brighton in the UK. My research looks at neurodivergent and neuroqueer experiences of space, both in translated contemporary Japanese literature and through my own creative writing practice. So neurodivergence is defined as having an atypical neurological configuration, such as autism, ADHD, dyslexia, depression, and synesthesia. And neuroqueering can mean many things, but for me, it is about the intersection of neurodivergence and sexuality, as well as an embracing of how one's neurodivergence queers their identity. And really, it's like aiming to decenter the cognitive and sensory norm, and therefore decentering neurotypical dominance. So in my writing, I draw on my own experience as a neuroqueer person and use a blend of storytelling, walking, and psychogeographic practices to reveal how my neuroqueer identity interacts with a city, in order to sort of raise the question of how we might make space more neuro-inclusive and accessible for neurodivergent people. Walking is such an important methodology to my research, as the mind is an embodied phenomenon, and I want to capture some of these body-mind experiences as I pass through a mostly neurotypical urban space. The audio piece I submitted for this conference is part of a collection of short stories that centre neuroqueer individuals' voices. Each character works for a fictional archive to create synesthetic maps of cities from around the world. And it was important to me to not only convey the concept of synesthetic maps as something that could be real, and in fact has been real, but to foremost explore the lives and voices of these individuals. The main character in the Nichier, Lim, is a concept to colour and person to colour synesthete, and is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. So for this story, I draw on my direct experience as a synesthete and sufferer of PTSD who recently moved to Brighton. At the time of writing. I really wanted to convey the significance of how colour is linked to place and person for Lim, how she experiences it bodily, how it can sometimes be triggering, and how sensory overload is a common experience amongst neurodivergent people. And the other characters in the collection are sound to colour and sequence-based synesthetes, and one aphantasic. So one of this project's main impetuses was to explore the anonymity of urban space and how we quite often have no idea who we're walking alongside and what stories these strangers have to tell. I wanted this short story collection to be just a very little insight into the vast plethora and diversity of the human body mind. And that's pretty much it.
Thank you. I hope I think I'm back on. I think we have last left Rui Antunes.
Already. Okay. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Geert, and thank you, Radhika, for hosting all this. So my name is Rui. I won't run away much from the video presentation I did because I have some footnotes to add to the presentation, so I think it's important. So I work in the Faculty of Human Kinetics in the Department of Dance. I work in a project called TEP, TEP, Technology Expanded Performance, and it looks well. We'll come back soon to what it looks at. But basically, my background is on visual arts and computing, so I'm nothing related with walking. Even though that, yes, I did a pilgrimage, and yes, I walk since I remember, at least. So why was I hired for this project that tries to? So the objective of the project is to look at the relationship between the body, the city, and the sound, and how they impact on each other. This mutual interaction. I was hired because in my postdoc I did because I have this background in computing, so I did this simulation of humans. So how do humans move in crowds? So so for a long time I've been trained in looking at how people walk and how do people take decisions to not bump into each other? What are the mechanisms involved in this on this process? So people think that I'm a cavalier, that I'm a gentleman, because I always let people go. But no, what I actually am doing all the time is watching. I'm addicted to watch people walking. I'm a voyeur. An academic voyeur in a sense. So that's my interest in walking. That's how it came, and so I engaged in this project, TAP. So TEP has a similar project in Brazil. We go hands to hands, so we collaborate a lot, and we do activities that involve the elements of the other team. And so we started in confinement. So the objective was to study the city, the body, and sound, right? But suddenly we were all confined in our houses. So we started. So this was a challenge. So how can we understand this if we are in our houses? Besides, starting a reading group and all these kind of activities, intellectual activities. So the first walk was synchronicities. So it was how do we see the city from our windows? So we shared materials and we made a big mosaic. So synchronicities. So everybody at the same time. So we had times that we would gather that would collect this information. And then the second walk was in the first week of deconfinement. Of the first deconfinement, we're already on the second. The first week we went to the street and we did a 12 hours walk, and a relay walk. So each person would walk 1 hour, and we would pass a notebook, and everybody would take notes for 1 hour and collect things. And during this time, we would be following that person, because that person would be sharing to the group via WhatsApp where he was, some comments, taking some photos, etc. So this was the second walk. And the third walk was when we changed from the emergency state to the calamity, or vice versa. Never know the names, but so it downgraded so we could actually be together, And so we did the cumplicidades, accomplice cities, where this is difficult to explain, but basically imagine a circle where at each node, two people would start walking. So simultaneously, in multiple times, people are starting walking, each one on its own direction. And so 1 hour after, each of these walkers would arrive to another location where someone else would be arriving. And in that location, they would receive a call from the Brazilian colleagues in order to share this experience, this 1 hour experience. They were also taking a notebook. And so this was the third walk. The fourth walk was in another downgrade of level. So this was to the public. We call it the sensorial walk. So we had 5 guides with the scores, so that they would tune the attention of the persons to certain aspects of the walk. So why I thought this was so important to talk about this? Because we are seeing a linearity in processes. We are getting more and more with the social, and more we are getting into the intimate. So if you start seeing the material that was collected in the beginning, everything was very visual, and slowly is becoming more and more intimate. And so at the same time, we also started to become known in the community. And so we were approached by Cynthia Hartman, who is also a researcher from a different faculty. And she's doing a work with blind people, with a group of blind people, Olhar Ativo. And so she invited us to, okay, you are doing these sensorial walks. Why don't we do something in collaboration? And so we found it an amazing opportunity. So what would be the sensorial experience without the prevalence of the eye? And so that's how we went into this project. So for this project, so we have this group. I would say, okay, they're not here, so, but anyway, I'll tell their names because they have been magnificent. Alio Baio, Ana Dias, Ana Martins, Graça Santos, João Carvalho, Odete Carvalho e Rui do Nascimento, because they are in some way co-authors of this study. So basically we had three points of departure, and then we would be walking for 1 hour and meet in another location where we would share our experiences. Each group had 2 walkers led by 2 sighted guides. What was the role of these sighted guides? Basically, before we had to prepare the path to see if there was obstacles, because the idea was to facilitate some kind of flannery, so that they wouldn't have to be worried about their vulnerability and their safeness. So somehow the role of the guides was to ease the process so that the walkers could be immersed in their experiences. And also, I'm finishing, and also one of the walkers was walking with a wheelchair. So we also had this extra layer of importance of the guide. So we had to map a trail that would be easy. And I was in that group, and I'm appalled how in 2021 in Lisbon, a city that since the 80s has been rebuilding itself, especially the historical part, the central part, in order to make it walkable, I am appalled by how difficult it was to make a walk for the wheelchair. I never had this experience, and I'm shocked. Sorry, I have a phone call. I think okay, that's it. We can expand this later if you want. I'm
Thank
not going
you.
to answer the call anyway.
Um, so, so as we go along, I thought what I might do in a kind of next round before we open it up to a more general conversation is actually to probe a little bit more with each of you on some more details of either the project or your practice, in more generally. I am one of the things that intrigued me, it's kind of a happy coincidence, is that all of the projects are actually quite urban. Even Simon's, that makes its way between places, is in a sense, we hear the church bells, we arrive in towns, and so in a certain sense, it brought me back to some of my early loves, Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And one of the things he says there is that you don't delight in a city's 7 or 70 wonders, but you actually delight in the answer that it gives to a question of yours, or the question that it forces you to ask, like thieves through the mouth of the Sphinx. So for each of you, I had a kind of a word or a riddle or a thing of, a question that I would have liked to hear a little bit more. And maybe I'll start with Simon. And the word I had for you was blister. And part of what I was interested in the blister, and I'll make a little ad here for Compeed Blister Plaster, which I absolutely adore. But what I was interested in when you brought up, and it comes up a couple of times in the audio piece, is how a blister focuses you on your feet, or it focuses you on your body in a kind of continual and continuous way, and therefore makes walking, which we are apt to take for granted, thankfully, really something that you have to be incredibly aware of, where, depending on where you blister it, where your, in a sense, your foot hits the ground, or how your socks. I mean, it makes you incredibly aware of the ground under your feet and the implements, the technology, the body itself through which you're walking. So I wonder if you might want to say something more about that particular quality of focus or attention, which is not unrelated to the pilgrimage, but a particular quality of focus or attention that might come through that kind of experience of pain. And I hope it links to some of the other ideas, which is not, deliberately causing oneself pain, but the thing that erupts from your body in response to strain of that kind.
I think you have to, it isn't a deliberate wish for pain, but it is a coming to terms with mortality and age, I think, during a long walk. But the blister, well, it scared me because we had 7 days to walk, and it was quite hot on the first day. I had advised, not following my own advice, I had advised Rob, the priest, to double sock. So to wear liner socks and another pair of socks. And then in the morning, I thought, it's too hot. I'm not going to do that. And it was a big mistake because I was the one at the end of the first day who got a really, really big blister. I mean, it was the biggest blister I've ever had. And it was just on the ball of my foot. It was the worst possible place. And it scared me because I thought, I don't know if I can walk for 7 days. I've never done that. And now I've got this big blister that by the end of the first day was quite painful. And when I took my sock off, it was like a big bubble. So I had to make the decision to burst it, because ordinarily with a small blister, you don't burst it, and the body absorbs it back in again. So generally speaking, that's what a Compeed plaster will help to do. But this was too big, and you get the opposite sort of medical advice when it's really sort of big. So I was in the evening, I was trying to deal with it. I was aware that I was walking almost straight away again on another 26-kilometer walk. So what you start to do subconsciously is you turn and you start to walk on the edge of your foot. And if you're not thinking about it, that's what you do, because you're trying to avoid the pain, the discomfort. But then, of course, a whole new experience of pain starts to occur. and the edge of your foot becomes very, very sore. And then that's affecting your calf. It's traveling up through your leg. It's changing the pitch of your shoulders. And if you allow that subconscious adjustment to happen, because of the same thing would happen with a small stone. If you carried on to walking with the tiniest stone in your boot on a long walk, it would begin to have that effect. So to answer your question, on the second day, I realized very early on that I needed to place the focus of my mind all the time on rolling my foot completely and fully onto the floor, which meant that I could feel the blister, but it meant that other problems weren't going to be created. And that actually, the weird thing, the ironic thing is that process became very enjoyable, because whilst the blister was uncomfortable, there was great enjoyment from feeling and really concentrating a mindful sort of recognition of the different surfaces. I would deliberately step sideways off a path onto the grass, for example, to find the softer surfaces, things like that. So I felt that I grew more of an understanding of the different surfaces that we encountered. The third day was the hardest, because we came into a very urban area that we have in Britain, which is the potteries of Stoke-on-Trent. Stoke-on-Trent is a crumbling ex-industrial sort of landscape with canals running through it. And so walking through it, it was a very long walk, was hard. Actually, each night I would then treat the blister and let it just leave the air to it. And actually, my body recovered. I really thought I was going to keep that blister for the entire week, but by the fourth day, it was feeling a lot better. So yeah, it really did change the process of walking, but not. I didn't need to fear it, actually. What I needed to fear was adjusting because of it. That's what I needed to stop happening, if that makes sense.
I'm curious, and maybe we can come back to it in a more general conversation. I'm curious, like, how does one, in the way in which I see Rui doing in his work, like, craft a politics out of the blister, right? Or an eco-politics out of the blister. Like, what does it sort of make you aware of? And one of the things it does, obviously, is surfaces. And I think Rui also said that in his project, like suddenly realizing, for example, that a surface may not be friendly to some walkers and is friendlier to others. I'll just turn to Hanna. Hanna, I'm very interested in your synesthesia project, particularly with the way in which you approach it through cartography or mapping. And part of what I want to ask is in a sense that the conflict or the tussle that one has with mapping, which is a cartographic project, which is a certain type of disciplining of experience into a structure, and the kind of bursts of phenomenological experience that you try to introduce through your synesthetic. So I'm trying to understand how you maybe reconcile is not right, but how do you leave open in your cartographic or mapping enterprise, or how does your project help us to think or open up the realm of cartography as something more than a disciplinary operation, but as perhaps something from which we can learn?
Great question. And I think when it comes to synesthesia, I think tending to it in a very phenomenological way is such an interesting thing, because it's a very structured experience in that, say, one person will always evoke the same color, or the same letter will always be the same thing, and I'll always experience time in the same track around my body. And I think that I'm going to slightly divert off down a little train of thought here, but the interesting thing about sequence-based synesthesia, which I don't explore in the Lenaitier story, but I do in another story, is that in order to sort of capture sequence space in a visual thing, you're never going to be in the same time frame as you were when you captured it. So it's sort of it's an ever-changing thing. So I really like that idea of fluidity and capturing that very moment of a city in that sort of snapshot. And I think that really, really reflects how an urban space is for us all, isn't it? Is that it is an organism. So I sort of wanted that that very sort of structured nature of synesthesia in the sort of the concept to color and person to color and lexical to color synesthesia, but also the very sort of changing organism, because you are a changing organism, with the structured aspect of cartography, to sort of really reflect the life of a city, I think. Does that answer your question? Does that make sense?
I think it's good, because we can continue. I have some thoughts beyond that, but we can kind of continue that conversation. But that's very helpful. Yannis, maybe I was going to ask you something about repetition, but I actually think, when listening to you again and something that you brought up, I'm curious about following, like walking as an activity where you're following in the footsteps of either someone else as a companion, or in your case, in the piece that you shared with us, the dog. And in fact, I suppose one of an experience of anyone who lives with another animal is, in a way, that negotiation, particularly with dogs, a negotiation, ideally, hopefully led by the dog, but somehow with the idea that you might return, that you have to follow something that is being driven or moving ahead by completely different markers and interests and yardsticks. And I know myself that if you walk, especially if you're doing a very long distance walk, I have to be careful not to walk alongside someone whose pace is not quite mine, because I end up getting really tired, because I'm either trying to slow down or speed up, or and so I'm curious about what we would ordinarily consider kind of a good thing, the relationality of walking, but how the notion of either following in the footsteps of or walking alongside actually can have a strangely disruptive or disruptive quality. So I'm curious if you have some thoughts from your dog project.
Yeah, maybe Simon is more relevant to answer this, because we heard his lovely companion before. But I would, your words make me think maybe a bit of the origins of sound walking, which might be not that relevant at first sight, but at the second, I think it's very, very classic. It's a very classic methodology, but still it's ever evolving, and it still generates variations, one of which can be based on what you are referring to right now. I mean, the concept of following, sound walking is normally has been established as a team that moves and enjoy and listens and pays attention to sounds that they had not paid attention in the past. So this is the very main principle, right? Of course, art and the academy has known many variations. This concept of following can be one of these, because it's never the same sound walk, yes, but it's always something that depends on the other next to you. Either you know this person, when you, for example, do a classic sound walk in a classic way, you know the person that is next to you, or you have just met him or her and walk together, right? But you can also make this variation that I'm referring to alone, and have another person unknown to you that is going faster or slower, or you pass through. You pass not through, actually, next to. And you can also have the music following you with your iPods, which there are not iPods anymore, but the theory of it and the evolution of the thinking about what we do with our AirPods now in our ears still exists, right? I mean, we can also think about following the music, or we may have all caught ourselves watching, pacing to the beat, to the BPMs of the music in our head. So I think this feeds the creativity space, the concept of how we form the way we walk, the way we create our pace with the known or with the unknown next to us is a constant and will be a constant creative space. No matter how old the concept of a soundwalk or the concept of, I mean, when did we start thinking about walking as a creative art practice? Long ago, but now it's now in the edge. We're doing something. We're talking about something very contemporary, right? We're all trying to evolve on this aspect. So that's my first thought, that we should maybe consider following as a creative space for new experiences. I don't know, new readings of our environment.
Because one of the things so initially when I saw the little, the sign for the piece that we were going to listen to, it said right foot, left foot, and I thought it's a march, right? Because I don't know, if you're marching, you're told. So the kind of worst kind of sound walk, I suppose, is the military march, right? Is like you're being told right and left. But one of the things that does is exactly what you're talking about, which is everybody walks to the same pace, and therefore you're able to traverse altogether a great distance. It's a terrible reason or a terrible form into which you might be poured, but it made me realize otherwise following things where each one is, as they say, marching to the tune of their own drummer. That's the English expression. That is, everybody is in a way not doing the march, but following their own music, makes for a certain kind of, maybe creative, but a certain kind of interesting disjuncture.
I just wanted to add to this, yes, that the left and right equally split aspects should be the focusing on the very, very detail of the thoughts and emptying the head totally. So that's maybe a creative way of marching, right?
Yes.
Hopefully.
Yes, absolutely. So Rui, let me come up. It's actually come up in an interesting way. So when you spoke, I realized it was something else, but the misunderstanding or the mistranslation that exists between English and Portuguese is actually interesting here. So the word complicity, as it seems, cumplicidade, which I realized perhaps in Portuguese means walking, or in your instance anyway, it seemed like having an accomplice, having someone else. But in English, complicity actually refers to a kind of collusion in something that is not quite legal. So complicity is what you have when both of us have got together to do something, not something wrong. I am complicit with you in that wrong. You did it, but because I let you do it, I'm complicit. So I want to take that misunderstanding and actually ask, because all of your projects, the synchrony, diachrony, accomplice, and the open for us what it might mean for us as city walkers to be complicit, that is, to collude, not altogether in a good way, to collude with the design of the city as it's given to us. So one of the things I feel that you're evoking in that tension of your different experiments is indeed, one way to ask it would be, who is the city made for? And I think, Hanna and others would kind of say the city's made for a certain kind of, and your project does it too, city's made for privileges a certain kind of walk. Mm-hmm. Often cities don't even privilege walking. I mean, US cities, for example, are not meant for walkers. But even cities that are open to walkers are open to certain kind of walkers, right? So they're not open to the person on the wheelchair. They're not open to the person who's not sighted. So I'm interested in what you think about us as walkers, or you as a walker, and what one is complicit with. That is, what is one making, kind of agreeing with, in a way, a design, an exclusionary design, if you will. Or if you want to think a little bit about the design of cities and our complicity with them, what do we permit them without questioning?
There's a wonderful book from Michel de Certeau. I don't know if you know it. Yeah, that it
Yes.
makes this distinction between space and place. Space being this architectural urban design, and place the place was the lived place where and he actually addresses this, saying that we walkers, we kind of sabotage the written design and the way the urban design plans the use. We actually make it our way. We'll make it our street, or our approach to the street in our small detours. And he talks about the language. So he kind of he uses this as a metaphor. So we walking is like writing. So we write in the language that is provided by the urban designers. So that is from a more theoretical framework, from a practical framework. Your question immediately triggers the COVID and this forced immobility that or conditioning of our mobility, and the way we kind of try to be more free in that kind of. So it's like it is now is not. For instance, right now we are in this precise moment. I never thought about this, but now this is very clear to me. There was this score, the 2 meters social distance or unsocial distance. So it was kind of a choreography we would all play, and now with this process of getting tired of this long, never-ending pandemic state, we are starting to use other choreographies within this choreography of the 2 meters. So somehow we are slowly adapting this forced or this. So I think it's natural that with time we make the place ours, and we through our use.
Do you think it's possible that we are right? And I don't know who the we is here. Obviously, there are many we's. But do you think it's possible that we're also writing? So in the de Certeau mode, de Certeau gives the walker in the city quite a lot of political power, right? Like the walker writes their own path. But I'm wondering about whether some walkers write the path that makes it very difficult for certain other walkers. So like some paths are written and some paths are not possible. So some of us either are entitled to walk, and some of us become disentitled, unentitled to walk. So I'm also curious about how walking itself perhaps does it have, it's a question, I guess, does it have some undemocratic or normative impulses as well, rather than the more liberatory one that we typically accord it? I mean, I don't necessarily mean you to answer it. It's just a thought that I had.
No, but it is definitely walking is not even though that is seen as a liberating act and associated with freedom. And yes, in so many ways it is. There's definitely a lot of and this conference has addressed in some of these talks, in addressing this. So there are modes that people are more vulnerable. How do you say this? Vulnerable.
Yes.
As women, people of ethnicities, minorities. We all know this. So walking is not neutral. Walking is not at all. Is political. Even gazing in the street, the way you gaze at other people is political. Is power. I've noticed this when I went to London to study. In Portugal, we look at each other in the eyes when we walk, especially men. But
Why?
in London, sorry?
Why do you do this?
I don't
Sorry.
know. It's just a cultural habit.
Okay.
But in London, I moved, so I was there for 10 years. I slowly moved my eye to the ground. And now I am in Portugal and I can't get back recover my power. Yeah, so it's very political. It's very power relationships.
I actually want to give you guys a chance, perhaps, if you have questions that have arisen from each other's work that you might want to ask each other. I just want to leave a little moment from either something somebody said or, a more general comment. That's fine too.
I have a question for Simon. Is kind of a provocation, I don't know. Which is, do you think because you're a person without faith, you said so, do you think you can, or what are you missing if you do a pilgrimage without the faith?
Well, I'm not a person without faith. I mean, I said I wasn't a Christian, but I've practiced as a Buddhist for 30 years and lived in a monastery for quite a while. But of course, in Buddhist philosophy, you're not externalizing the notion of something divine, and that changes. What's really fun for me and interesting was that changed the emphasis from the venue, the end of the pilgrimage, the place that you were going to the process, to the internal experience. And so that was the point of my discussion really with Rob, that, for me, there was this big question about the problem I had with making myself suffer, which is very un-Buddhist, the problem I had with dealing with why is suffering okay, in this kind of context, what is that for? So I was experiencing, real problems with that in some ways, and whether that is an efficacy or not. And I can't give you a complete answer. It seems necessary, but I think that Radhika touched on it when Radhika, you said, well, you're not choosing to suffer. It's unfortunately the technology of your body and your age and other things is actually going to cause that. That's. But there is something that you understand from that. So I suppose for me, I'm interested in arguing that we do gain something from pilgrimage, even if we're doing the Camino de Santiago, and it's unlikely, I don't want to cause offense, but it's unlikely that the bones are of St. James anyway. It's very unlikely, but that's irrelevant, because it's actually, I think the walk charges whilst the venue publishes. So I'm interested in that, the association between, those two things. And I think also in all of the different papers and my experience, I noticed the intense, playful telescope between the micro and the macro. So we have the macro world of sound and color and the intensity of this, particularly in your work, but actually what happens is that things bring us very, very much back into a kind of micro internal experience as well, which is what the blister did to me. I don't know if that answers, but it's a lovely question. Thank you. It's a lovely question. But yeah, I think if someone has not got faith, that they can still be an incredibly spiritual person, you know. So I think you can venerate the journey, I think, you know. That makes sense.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Would anyone else like to weigh in, or
I would love to pass that.
Yeah,
I'd
yeah,
love
please.
to pass the idea of I'd love to pass that idea of the micro and the macro to the other speakers, that whether they I mean, I felt I could see it in, you know, this in Hanna, your story, but also very much in Yannis' work as well, this idea of the way that you're moving backwards and forwards between something very internal and something much bigger, particularly in the urban environment.
Actually, I don't know if I open with my short response to you, if I will open the subject too much, but I will do my best not to. I recently studied deaf professionals and their practices, how they deal with living how deal with all the procedures that have to be done so to bury someone who has been deceased. And I was wondering now if I try to combine it with the working practice, the final steps that are made till the grave are very, very concrete, and they're very intense for the bereaved, but they are also a routine for the professional. And I was just thinking about it just before, because you said that you had in your work you did all these pilgrimage with the priest, and I was trying to get in his shoes, because he is a kind of a death professional, right? He performs ceremonies, death ceremonies, funerals. So I was wondering, and considering the micro and macro aspect that you were referring to, my recent research shows that all the micro actions of death professionals, both makeup artists and priests and funeral directors and diggers, grave diggers, we have done some interviews, ethnographic interviews with all of these practitioners. It shows that they try to find in these micro actions in their everyday life the way to show themselves as being normal, whatever normal might signify, right? But these are the micro actions. Or, for example, in Cyprus, there are urban legends. It's such a small place, and so few death professionals, so few funeral services desks, that all they create enemies one with each other, and our urban legends feed from this. But in a micro level, these are just big stories that are somewhere behind, and in a micro level, in everyday level, they try to somehow expel their liminality, try to prove themselves, or to prove to me as a researcher that I go there and I observe, to say that this is every day. It's something normal. So that's my short comment.
I did ask him actually that very question. That's really interesting. Radhika, can I give the answer? Is that okay? Because I'm interested in Hanna's answer as well. But yeah, it's really funny that you say it, Yannis, because on the final day we were walking down an extraordinary lane called Cross in Hand Lane. And it was called Cross in Hand Lane because pilgrims used to walk with a small cross in their hand. And he took me to a discussion of pilgrimage with him, and I talked to him about the Kailas, the Mount Kailash pilgrimage in Tibet. Now there you climb up to 18,600 feet to the Vajrayogini place of death. And at that kind of field of death, it's metaphoric death. Yes, there are burials up there, are cloud burials on the route, but in this metaphoric place of death, people leave clothing, even teeth, hair, and you see people practicing death. So people actually perform being dead. It's an extraordinary idea. But I was saying to him that everything that follows that when you leave is then a kind of rebirth. So it's like a renewal. So I think that whilst that isn't a direct answer to the real, the physical, the real process of a funeral, I think there is still a kind of meta world in terms of that walking and that process, which can feel normal, but the necessary sort of liminality of putting something away in order to move on, I guess. And he was really interested in how similar that idea of of this moment where something is born through the walking, how similar that was almost to the evangelical kind of notion of being born again, And I said, well, in many respects, it's a human need to, please let me give away my past and walk freshly into the future. And I think there's a lot of that in walking for me. So, yeah. Hanna, maybe that's a moment of to refer to PTSD. I don't know, and as well, I'm walking. I don't know.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what prompted me to think with the micro and macro is a couple of things, actually, if you don't mind me addressing that. Was in fiction writing, the way to create, a good narrative is to tend to the micro, then tend to the macro, and that sort of like nice pace of the way that we walk through a narrative, the same as the way that we walk through a city. But also when it comes to PTSD and the fight, flight, and freeze, I really feel like fight and flight is very the micro detail of experience, and then the freeze and the disassociation. Sorry, I've gotten the wrong way around. The macro is the fight and flight, and the micro is the dissociation and sort of like backing off and sort of making yourself unavailable. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say. Oh no, I have one more thing. Sorry, just popped into my mind, and I was thinking about energy levels as well, especially with ADHD and how energy levels can be very extreme, in that they can be very sort of hyper focused on very finite detail, and then the energy levels can go somewhere else completely or just drop out, or like my attention just happened then. Can drop out.
Ask if anyone in our audience might want to ask a question or have a question for the panelists. Yannis? I mean, the other Yannis, Zogas?
I'm the other Yannis.
A rare moment, Yannis, when you are the other Yannis.
Hello. How are you? Hello. I would like to ask Simon. You spoke about the pilgrimage when everyone was holding a cross, let's say, or an object. What do you think? I mean, what is the difference between watching in such an endeavor with an object, whatever object, like or without an object? Do you think that there is any difference?
There isn't necessarily for me, but I suppose that it's about then. Well, I suppose when I've been on Buddhist yatras, people always are walking with their prayer beads, and you can see them sort of moving the beads, as they walk along. And in the past, when I've spent time in the Himalayas, I've found myself copying that just because it was so beautiful. It was just such a lovely thing to do, and it also for me metered the steps of my walking. So I guess that it again. But I think an object probably is the micro. It focuses, it brings the mind in, and certainly in that it's a lane. So in English, that means a very small road. It's been there for a long time. It's the final. It comes down from what was originally a nunnery that would receive pilgrims before their final walk down to this immense cathedral. In a very small town. And this lane is called Crossing Hand Lane, and they would walk, and only at that point would they hold the object. And I think that it probably then is a reflection on the last days, on the walk that they've just done, because they know now that they're going to finish it. So I think they and it's just a bit of history that I read, Yannis, so I'm not an expert, but I think they would hold a small cross in their hand because they would then reflect on their faith as they walk down to the final shrine, which was a well. It was the well of St. Chad. So I think it was an object maybe to turn their focus from the world to something internal, probably. Yeah.
Were they leaving this cross somewhere, or were they taking it then with them? When they were
taking it with them. Yeah. I think they were taking it with them. I found it a beautiful idea, this idea that suddenly they would hold it in their hand, because you're aware of something in your hand. When you're walking and you're holding something, you're very aware of it, I used a traditional stick to walk, a very long traditional stick, the size of a medieval pilgrim stick. And I hadn't realized that that's like a pendulum. It's not really, it didn't really help me climb anything, but it's like a pendulum in the hand, and you feel the ground, moving. It's like being in Venice and moving the boat along, it was so holding. I thought that might become problematic to hold it, that I would get annoyed, frustrated with holding this big staff, this big stick. But actually, no, it was a really nice experience having that with me. So I think the cross, maybe this small item, is something you have to concentrate on holding. Yeah. It's a lovely question.
Before we close, I could ask you guys one last question, which is really for all of you as artists, because everyone presented for us a project that often derives from another walking experience, and they're durationally quite different. I mean, Yannis's is 2 minutes and change. Hanna's is 29 minutes, 45 seconds or thereabouts. Simon, you edited yours. Rui. And so it's a question about how you understand duration in walking. Like, how do you understand the place of time in the context of walking, both as one walks, as multi-day, an hour. I think, Rui, your walk was an hour through the city, but then also in this strange moment of translation, which is the document of walking or the conveying of walking in other media. How do you think about, as artists or writers, about duration and time? If it doesn't hold, if it's not something that immediately grabs it, it's fine. But
I'm desperate to answer it, but I know that I answered last, so maybe someone else should speak before.
Okay, so if anyone else would like to, Yannis, I'm particularly curious because yours is 2 minutes and 12 seconds or something.
Yeah, I don't know. possibly as a mostly audiovisual artist, walking in the POV culture, let's say, of a human or a non-human walking, reminds me of empty space in filmic terms, of course, right? So I could, if I tried to confess something to you, I could possibly have cheated on working and on creating what I wanted to say with my artwork, while using the very slow motion of the video as a background, as a carpet that as radio producers love to say. And I cannot till now get unstuck with this POV idea of dogma, for example, of the cinema in the late 90s, of this game of how we see cinema to feel some time, but to also to experience reality. Because the first one is to feel the time, the empty time, that we're going there, we're getting there, and we can have hours and hours of POV footage. And then we have the absolute reality. So my dimension that I want to give to this subject is the mediated one, to see and to experience watching through the lens, the film lens.
Okay. Rui, do you want to, and then I'll turn it to Simon.
Well, there was no conceptual reasoning beforehand. So what I did, I can share only how I did it. So I've collected all the. So we have interviewed the participants for 1 hour, right? I think I missed that. Individually, and so we've translated that, we transcribed and then translated, and I've made a collage of sections by theme, and I wrote from that big mosaic a text, and then I put that text without considering the time. Okay. So there was no reasoning about the output, and then I've put the video as a collage as it makes sense, thinking that it would be easy to shortening into the 15 minutes that was suggested by the organization, and so I spent 1 day to shorten from 37 minutes as it is now to 30. Mm-hmm. And so I said, okay, forget, there's no way we can do this, because anything I would remove, it was essential for me. Any sentence that, okay, let's leave the video for 37 minutes, even if it was 2 hours, whatever is needed, and let's make the 15 minutes with the presentation, and okay, we're all done. So okay, so that's my answer. There's no aesthetic reasoning behind the format, the length.
And how about the 1 hour walk? Was there a reason it was an hour, or was it just the time between 2 points?
That is a good one. That is a good one, because we always feel that is too short, but there's two things actually. One is that it is always too short, and the other is the hurriness when you have a time to be in the end. But that's kind of our format, so that's how. No, we couldn't make it longer, because then it would be very, very problematic in terms of logistic. Yeah, I don't have a smart answer.
No, it's just curiosity, because I mean, very often walking, people say, well, I'm not a walker, meaning that they don't walk long distances. And I'm curious as to what makes, why has that become, when all of us walk, why has that become the sign of the walker, the hiker, right? So anyway, Simon, you did want to say something, and then maybe Hanna, if you have a moment.
Well, actually, mainly because it's a great opportunity for me to apologise, which is, for an English guy is what we like to do, as you probably know. So my apology is that, in a way, not in a way, my paper was put on the site late. For the same reason as Rui, I was overwhelmed with the amount of material that I realised I had. I'd recorded every day. I mean, I'm going to turn it into 10 half-hour podcasts because I haven't been able to include any of the conversations with people that we met. Half of the conversations I had with Chris on the first day and with Rob, I can't include them because getting that material down was very, very difficult. And I just edited for days and days trying to reduce it until I couldn't anymore, in a way that left it making sense as a paper. Because the other thing I say at the start is that whatever intention I had for structure just got lost on the walk. And because we just encountered things that, I'd be recording and we'd suddenly come to a really difficult object that we needed to climb over, an old fence or something. And then I would stop recording, lose where I was in my thought process, and then all of these problems. But the main thing that I want to say in answer to your question is that I discovered something artistically that I believe and which I'm a little shocked by, and it's obvious really. And that is that we socially have forgotten the relationship of long distance and time in terms of our feet, because we don't walk long distances anymore. And even 100 years ago, people did, that was normal. It was normal to walk for days to a market or something. I don't know. Perhaps in some parts of the world, of course, that's still the case. We know that's the case. But certainly in my world, in a lot of lives, we don't walk anymore in that way. We might go for a 4 or 5 hour hike. Brilliant, that's fantastic. My walk coincidentally went from where I live now in Cheshire back to where I was from, which was the Midlands. And I drive that. I drive to see my mother. It takes me an hour and 25 minutes to see my mother. And it takes 7 days to walk. And so the wonderful realization for me now is that I have an embodied knowledge of walking back to my home from where I live now. And that was a revelation. So just connecting that was just beautiful. That was the nicest thing. Yeah, that's my answer.
Hanna, did you want to add something? You'll have the last word, I think.
Amazing. Yeah, a couple of things. I, for no other reason, just on a whim, I really wanted this story to be exactly 5,000 words. And that's how I made it. And reading it came to be, I think, around 26 minutes. And then the recording that I made was a walk from my house in Hove up the road to Brighton and down to the seafront, and it just fit perfectly, like with a hang on either side of the speech, and it seemed sort of meant to be in there. If you're able to listen to the background recording, it's incredible how certain points of the story reflect the aspects that the audio I've recorded on the audio, such as the flower stand. But also I just wanted to say an interesting thing about PTSD and time, and that was something I was so concerned with in the writing, was to sort of try and explore that a little further, in that when a trauma happens, there's often a temporal delay and sort of a collapse of witnessing. But then in the triggering and being triggered, you're brought right back to that moment of trauma. And I think that sort of layering of experience was really, really important to me in the writing of this story. yeah, like the layering of place and the layering of color. Yeah.
So that's actually extremely strong because, I mean, one is the duration between places or between things, but the fact that the trauma can collapse. I mean, both in your account and Simon's idea of like the distance between you and your mother can either be a long way away or can be collapsed in in an instant of time. I mean, that's a very interesting idea about temporality and experience. I think we are at time, and I know that many of you are in other zones and probably need to go on to a glass of wine or something, something pleasant at this time of day. I want to say thank you very much for the conversation and for being introduced to all of your work, and hope we can, continue it in some way.